Good evening, viewers, and welcome back to Shivery, Chilling Tales of Horror. I'm Russell, your script keeper and host, here to bring you a new batch of scary stories submitted by patrons all across Washoe County. Tonight, we dive into a few ocean-themed tales and meet a few mysterious characters. We have a little of everything to send shivers down your spine and make your skin crawl. In fact, this first story is certain to chill you to the bone.
Bones by Colby W. Devin Demotri. My friends call me DD. And explain to me what happened again, says the FBI agent investigating me. Well, basically, when there's a full moon at night, I turn from a human into a skeleton, I say. The FBI agent asks, so, like a werewolf? Kind of, I say. I don't believe you, he says. Well, that's what everybody's been saying, I think to myself. But I don't say that. Instead, I say, why not? When I leave the interrogation office, I go straight home. I don't talk to the paparazzi outside of my home. Oh yeah, did I not mention I'm all over the news? Okay, I suppose I should explain what happened. Basically, when I turn into a skeleton, I forget everything that happened to me when I was in my human form, and vice versa. So I snap back into my human form the morning after the night of the full moon, and I grab a bowl of cereal and turn on the news. Immediately, my jaw drops as there's a spoonful of cereal halfway in my mouth. There's a video leaked of me transforming from my human self to my skeleton self. And yes, you can see my face. In the top right corner of the screen, there's a picture of me with bold words, "Wanted," under it. I was in serious trouble. Snap! I'm in the woods. I look around me. Nothing. I look at my hands. Bones. I look at my ribs. Bones. I don't even have a heart. I'm a skeleton, I thought. All that was running through my mind was blood, violence, gore. I couldn't get it out. It's like I'm a savage animal, and I hear twigs snapping to my right, and I look to see what it is, and I see hikers taking pictures and videos. My brain takes over and I start running towards them. I can't stop. And that's all I remember, sir, I said. Okay, says the FBI agent.
Makes you want to leap right out of your skin, doesn't it? Oh, I see you already have. You the skeleton from the last story? Skeleton, a few words. How mysterious. Reminds me of a story of a mysterious man. Since you're such a good listener, perhaps I'll jump right in and tell it.
The Mysterious Man by Georgia D. Fall had just begun, and it seemed as though a blanket of cold had laid itself over the town. Everyone was wearing scarves and beanies, and the air sat thick in the sky. Harsh winds blew against transitioning trees, and the crunchy red and yellow leaves fell to the ground. The normally busy streets seemed deserted, except for a determined young woman by the name of Mary Rogers. Mary was the type of person to go about her day with a well-thought-out plan. She never showed up late, was always prepared, and it seemed as though everything always went her way. This was until yesterday. Mary had been walking down the street, and like every Tuesday morning, she had stopped to get her coffee. Things seemed normal until she reached the usually busy cafe. The bell rang above her as she walked through the door, and she immediately noticed no one was there. Not thinking anything of it, she walked confidently up to the counter and ordered her usual. It wasn't until she looked up that she saw her friendly barista wasn't there. "Who are you?" she asked, in a rude tone unlike herself. The man smirked and slid a note to her on the table. Mary paid for a drink and sat down in the eerily silent cafe. She handled the parchment with great care and examined it carefully. Feeling its red wax seal beneath her fingers, she slowly began to unfold the paper. Her mind was spinning, filling itself with every possible scenario. Inside, the note read, in curvy black handwriting, "Meet me at the old car wash house if you want to live. 8 p.m. tonight. P.S. I know what you did." And Mary was stunned. She quickly walked out of the cafe, not even stopping to grab her drink. Has someone found out the truth? What really happened that day? And the bright moon shone through the boarded windows, casting a muted glow. The old house's walls allowed an icy wind to slip into the cracks and weave its way through the room. The air made its way into the curtains, catching the anxious eyes of Mary Rogers. Tonight she wore a red velvet dress, accompanied by black boots and a small lacy hat. The heels of her boots tapped on the floor as she paced back and forth in the room. The floor creaked beneath her, seeming as though it was longing for a break, and Mary's mind was racing. Did she make the right decision? She continued to think until her mind was silenced by the echo of footsteps from above, and she took a moment to collect herself before sitting and waiting for the door to open. In walked a tall, slim man who wore a pinstripe suit and shiny black shoes, and the man looked her up and down before smirking. "You're the barista," Mary exclaimed, and she immediately rose from her seat and prepared herself, for she didn't know what was to come. "Ah, yes, you're just as smart as they say." The tone he used implied that he was hiding something. "Mary," the man was very collected, as though he had rehearsed, "we have to leave." His icy fingers wrapped around her arm and pulled her out of the dark room. She reluctantly followed, too scared to refuse, and they walked outside into the night and took a pause, allowing their eyes to adjust. Leaves rustled beneath their feet, and a gray mist sat low on the ground. Mary turned to see the old house again. Memories flooded her vision, and a silent tear slid down her face, catching the light as it fell, and the man moved fast. He appeared to be in a hurry. His grip on her wrist tightened, and after navigating the forest for some amount of time, they stumbled upon a chained metal gate. He slid his hand into his pocket and Mary backed away. She was relieved that he had only pulled out an old keychain filled with rusty keys. This, however, still provided no comfort for the girl. The man swiftly picked out one key from the rest and fit it perfectly into the lock, and the gate swung open. Inside the gate appeared to be a dead meadow that was filled with various gravestones. The tall man led her effortlessly through the tall grass to what appeared to be a particular grave. He stopped in front of it and almost threw Mary towards the stone. "Read it," he demanded, and her mind began to shut down. Mary realized where she was. She managed to get out the sentence before breaking down. She read aloud. "Here lies Nicholas Harty, 1957 to 1979. Mary began to silently sob. "You killed him." The man was no longer calm. "You had a choice, and you chose to kill my brother? My friend?" Mary could no longer take it, and she began to cry. "I'm sorry, it wasn't me," she pleaded at his feet. "He's alive," she managed to yell, and silence fell over them. The air got icy. He bent down to examine the grave, his hand sliding over the letters, and just as he was about to speak, boom! A rotten old hand reached out from the ground, and the dirt beneath the stone began to turn, and almost in slow motion, up rose a decaying creature. The zombie's cloudy eyes examined the gravestone, and it took a deep and shaky breath. Looking towards the tall man, its bony arm extended and grabbed him. He was dragged through the meadow and out into the forest. Mary dusted off her skirt in an attempt to clean out the mud, and in one quick motion, she began to run. The forest appeared to be holding its breath, just as nervous as her, and Mary ran hard back to town, not stopping once. Her heart was pounding in her ears, and her breath felt sharp. And from that day forward, no one spoke of Mary Roberts and the mysterious man ever again.
I wonder if talking about the mysterious man will cause him to return. Hopefully not. But if he does, I know just the place we can never find us. Deep, deep in the sea.
13,000 Feet Below. A short yet spooky Halloween story by Callie W. It was a dark and stormy night. Okay, not really. Actually, more like a fuddled and flighty night. The submarine creaked and croaked with the sway of the currents around it. The metal beast breathed just like an animal as it fought its way across the Atlantic Ocean. The tight corridors didn't have a lot of light, but it would have to do considering they would have to conserve energy to make it to their final destination, Russia. Julia tightly clenched the pipe near her head. She did not like the feeling of being 13,000 feet below the sea. Anything could go wrong. A pipe could burst and gases could leak. Even a screw could come loose and bring all hundreds of thousands of liquid tons down upon them. But what she feared the most was being harbored just down the hall. Julia could smell the rotten breath of the animals it was eating. She listened to the crackling of bones and the tearing of flesh. It wasn't a pretty sight to picture in your mind. She felt tempted to stand from her seat, walk down the slim hallway and close the door, but it was mandatory to have it open at all times, and monitor the great animal. She knew that she shouldn't, so she didn't. She continued to picture in her mind what the beast looked like. A two-tongued tiger, a giant 50-foot snake, maybe even a hippopotamus. Before she could blink, the sound of footsteps and voices filled her ears. She looked through the dim lighting to see the submarine mechanic walking down the hallways, most likely going to check on the fuel caps. They had had some problems with them earlier, popping off every once in a while as they hit turbulence. She could see the glint of metal materials in the satchel on his shoulder. A wrench, hammer, a screwdriver, nothing out of the ordinary. As his clinking tools and heavy boots passed her and turned a corner, she was greeted by another sight, the captain of the ship. And Julia began to get the feeling when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and when you start to develop sweat in places you never knew you could. That anxious feeling you get that you can't quite shake. She looked down the hallway to see the hushed whispers of her companions. The worried looks traveled from one another. Something was wrong. Before she could do anything, a nearby siren screamed into Julia's ear, and the lights were cut, leaving everyone in total darkness. Her companions started to yell, trying to find one another. She could hear the shakiness in their voices, and she felt the area around her, remembering that there were many pipes and other loose objects. Cold metal brushed her fingertips as she guided herself towards the engine room. Maybe there was something she could do to help the others. When she reached the boiling hot room, she could sense the vibrations of footsteps. "What's going on?" screamed the captain to the mechanic. "I don't know," he replied. "The main circuit that connects the controls to the electrical is damaged," and the submarine jolted forward, knocking things off shelves and people to their feet. Julia tried to grab something near her, but her hands only reached for air, and she fell to the ground with another bump from the vessel. She could feel the engine coming to a stop underneath her feet.
I'm thinking that submarine is never going to surface. That's why I've always preferred the surface to the water. An inflatable tube, a cool drink, a little sun, maybe even a spot of fishing. But as our next story will tell you, even the surface can be a very scary place.
Ocean Things by Jonah P. Yes, finally! After my 5th cast of the day, I caught one. It has been 2 hours of me and my dad going to different spots to try to catch a fish. This was the 5th spot next to Santa Cruz, and I finally caught a Goliath grouper. Okay, it might seem like nothing to you, but let me tell you, these babies get up to 300 pounds, and they even look like some sort of monster. So trust me, catching a 100-pounder is hecka cool. As I was yanking it up into the boat, it wiggled once, twice, bam! It slapped my dad right in the face. And I tried pulling up as hard as I could, but it was just too heavy. And finally, the fish pulls through and I lose my grasp. Ugh! I was so focused on getting out of the boat, I forgot about my dad. And I look over and I don't see him. He's probably getting ice for his face, I think to myself. I go over to the stairs where we usually keep our fish, which has ice, and I don't see him. After not seeing him there, and not seeing him on the deck, I start to worry. Where could he possibly be, I wondered. Maybe I didn't see him. He was just there up on the deck. These are all things I say to myself. Deep down I know where my dad is. I don't want to believe it, but I know. I look over the edge of the boat and I see, very deep down, there's a body. No! And I remember what happened. I remember that I was too focused on the fish to even care. And I remember the splash of him hitting the water. I remember. I fall to my knees and sob. And as I gather my thoughts, I'm speechless. Before I figure out what I need to do next, I hear a very loud and powerful thrashing in the water. For the second time that day, I look over the edge of the boat, just to be completely and utterly terrified. My knees tremble. And as I stumble over the edge, within less than a second of hitting the water, I'm not in the water anymore. There are no words to describe what I feel right now. The only sentence I can say to explain this is, I'm inside of a shark. Not only am I slowly dying, but the other smell is so vile I can't stop throwing up. The last things I remember are having my body turn inside out and having excruciating pain in my hip from the shark tooth.
Not a good way to go, eaten by a shark, gone without a trace. Speaking of traces, have you ever thought to be afraid of a footprint? Neither had I until I heard this next story.
Footprint by Isla M. Kaylee Robinson sat straight up in her bed, breaking out into a cold sweat. Kaylee was so discombobulated that she didn't even notice her husband was snoring very loudly. She couldn't remember exactly what the nightmare was about, but she did know that the nightmare had huge, brown, indented footprints all over her house. Kaylee turned her neck slowly. Her eyes followed splotchy brown prints up and down the white walls and floor, and Kaylee took a sharp breath until shock kicked in. Ah! Kaylee screamed as she ran down the spiral staircase, through the yellow kitchen and out the wooden door to the front porch. Moments later, her husband ran out the door screaming. He had no idea what was going on, and Kaylee right away started dialing 911 on her phone. A few minutes later, she was finally able to call the number. It had taken a few tries because her fingers were shaking a lot. "Hello, this is the police department. How can I help you?" a woman spoke. "Hi, my name is Kaylee Robinson. I have huge brown footprints all over my house," Kaylee said as soon as the policewoman was done talking. "I see. We will send a detective right away to figure out what thing made those footprints," the policewoman said. a little bit confused. Her husband finally calmed once he knew Kaylee had called the police, but it took Kaylee a while to fully calm down. Instead, she kept pacing around the front porch thinking about which animal could have made that footprint. Well, she did remember that it had big claws and human-like feet. She finally concluded that it must have been Bigfoot, although she wasn't too sure. A couple hours later. Well, we have come to the conclusion that it must be a polar bear footprint. But I don't know how that's possible since we live in the desert. I suggest searching the house for fur or holes the polar bear could have made, said the detective as soon as he had inspected the entire house. How is that possible? Spoke Kaylee. It was probably more likely that Bigfoot could have made those footprints than a polar bear. There have been polar bear sightings in here before. But, just like I said, check the house for fur and holes, said the detective as he started walking out of the kitchen. She then heard the sound of tires screeching on pavement, and Kaylee was shocked. The detective hadn't even checked the basement, attic, or the guest bedroom. Although she was a little bit relieved, she hadn't been very pleased with his attitude, and the way he kept saying, check the house for fur and holes that a polar bear could have made. And after a while of silence and sitting in the kitchen, her husband finally said something. Are you okay? I know it's been a long day of terror and tiredness. Do you want me to make dinner so you can relax and enjoy silence? This was the first thing he had remarked since the detective had left. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just a little tired. And yeah, that would be nice. But I think I'm going to go check the attic, basement, and closet for fur and holes. Detective's orders, she answered. And her husband chuckled, and Kaylee smiled at her own joke. It had been the first smile she had made all day. Then she got up out of the bar stool she was sitting on and went to walk to the basement to see if there was anything that would show polar bear had been there. And as she was walking to the dark basement, she thought about how she had been up since 5 this morning. She usually woke up at 8 or 9 in the morning. Then Kaylee started searching for any sign of a polar bear. She looked behind the water heater. There wasn't even a sign of a mouse. She looked in the closet full of old stuff. There were old clothes, movies, and books. But, to her discouragement, there was nothing polar bear related. As she was about to get discouraged, she noticed the door handle sticking out behind a painting. And just as she noticed, there was no smell coming from the kitchen. So she took the painting off the wall, and sure enough, there was an actual door handle. And when she turned the door handle, it made a creaking sound, and then the door opened. Inside, there was something she hadn't been sure she had been looking for. Big, furry brown footprint makers.
Sometimes when I'm here alone in this building, I'll hear footsteps. Ghosts, maybe. Production crew. I always kind of hoped it was somebody playing a prank on me. But as this next story will tell you, not all pranks are funny. Some are downright scary.
Watching Over You by Lola S. Warning. This story is not fictional. Anyone who might think so, don't be hopeful. Know that in your heart, not all stories have happy endings. Amanda and Miranda were identical twin sisters who loved pulling pranks. Almost every day before and after school, they would prank each other, just for the fun of it. They loved making people a little scared. They didn't have any friends because of their love for fright. They only had each other. One boring Sunday evening, Amanda thought of an absolutely, positively hilarious prank to scare her sister with. She told Miranda to go outside to get the mail. Miranda agreed because both girls knew that it was her day to get the mail. She went outside, and her prank worked even better than she thought. Miranda slipped on the goo-infested stairs and crashed into the mailbox. Miranda was furious. You ruined my favorite dress, and ow, my knee! Amanda went back into the house, sobbing. After dinner, Miranda was still fuming about her scraped knee and torn dress. The dress was so pretty and divine. Her poor knee was red and bruised. Pathetic, really, Amanda told her while the girls emptied their dishes. It's just a dress. Miranda was furious. Amanda would be sorry. Very, very sorry. If only Amanda knew what was to come. Miranda made it to be harmless. But, as I said before, not all stories have happy endings. That night, Amanda got up to get some water. She tripped on the oil lamp Miranda purposely put there that night. Her leg was bleeding and her nightdress was torn. She looked up and saw the flames coming out of the ground. The oil lamp slid on the wooden floors and started a fire. That night, 4 were in, but only 3 came out. Each weekend, Miranda and her depressed father would go visit the graveyard and put flowers where Amanda's restless body lay. She died because she couldn't walk, but only Miranda knew that secret. No one knew how the fire started or how Amanda became engulfed in flames. One dark night, Amanda went to visit Amanda at her grave alone. She was about to put down the roses when she saw something frightening. The rest of her flowers were on top of Amanda's grave. They read, I see you. Amanda ran screaming. She would never look at things the same way again. Days passed, months passed, eventually years. Miranda was a successful lady. She had a kind husband, 2 wonderful kids, Sweetie Pie the dog, and an amazing job at a children's hospital. Still, her sister's threat was troubling. She knew something was out there, watching, waiting. When Miranda was a child, she went to therapy. Her nightmares were even scarier when she was little. People called her crazy, other children made fun of her, and the big kids at her school would laugh and tell her it was probably just a prank. She knew it was not a prank. She knew she wasn't crazy. She knew it was Amanda who put the flowers. Amanda who threatened her. She knew something was coming, and it would not be a harmless prank. A ghost, a fire, a torn dress. Amanda woke with a start. It was cold, damp, creepy even. Her mouth was dry. She needed water. Miranda got up. The water didn't help her dry mouth. Everything was still, quiet. She checked on the children. They were safe. Good, she thought. Amanda was about to go back to sleep until she saw a girl. "What have you done?" The girl screamed, and everyone could hear her. Still no one could. "I'm sorry," Miranda cried out in terror. She knew the girl, the pale skin, burned face, bloody leg, the spirit of her once lively sister Amanda. "My revenge, my secret, this time." "No!" Miranda screamed, then silence. What happened next is too terrible to hear, but listen closely if you dare. Everything swapped. A new chapter. Amanda, once restless no more. That night, the spirit of Amanda withdrew her sister from scaring her, and her end took her body in the living, whilst Miranda's body was buried deep in the ground, dead, swapped lives. Amanda, known as Miranda, still lives today, giving flowers to her twin's dead body, and not one single person knows except you and me.
Thank you, Lola, and thank you everyone at home for listening to Night 2 of Shivery. Tomorrow will be our 3rd and final installment. Hope to see you back here around the fire.